My name is Steve Abott. I'm the head of the Social Science Department, and we'd like to welcome you to another part of our Black History Symposium. And today we're very honored to have one of my colleagues from the Behavioral Sciences Department, Dr. Gary Burbridge, who is also the director of our sustainability program here at GRCC. And his topic today is going to be environmental racism, inequality. So without any further ado, I would ask you to give a warm welcome to Dr. Gary Burbridge.
Thank you. Well, you know the topic. You saw the flyer, so you know what we're talking about today. This is a topic that's somewhat problematic because it deals with a subject that often gets dealt with in two different bundles or two different baskets. We talk about environmental issues on the one hand, and we talk about social responsibility on the other hand, which often tends to relate to issues of poverty and injustice and those kinds of things. And we talk about them as if they were two different things, as if they were somehow unrelated. I don't happen to believe that that's true, and fortunately I happen to be correct, so that it works out just right. So, no, we at Grand Rapids Community College have been engaged in an interest in both of these subject areas for a very long time, certainly, and it's not as if it's new to our purview as in terms of issues. But what we've done more recently is to try to put these two issues together with another component and come up with what we are calling sustainability, which is a word that I think people are more familiar with now because you begin to see it. It's being used in advertisements and things like that, which usually is whenever Madison Avenue picks up on it, it's the death of an idea, but we'll hope that doesn't happen. What we're talking about here, and I'll use these slides to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. I'm not going to speak to the PowerPoint so much, is that we're talking about the correlation between social justice, environmental integrity, and economic equity. And it's the three pieces together that are what really matter. If you keep them separate, if you deal with them as separate issues, you never really get to the core of the problem or problems that exist. So what we're trying to do is to understand how these things fit together, and that's the heart of what is now being called sustainability or the sustainability movement or whatever it might be called. So what I'm going to deal with today primarily are the two pieces that are closest to the subject matter for this week's or this month's observance. But please understand that part of the reason why this is appropriate is because when we talk about these kinds of issues, we're often talking about people who are categorized as minorities or people who are in less advantageous positions in terms of society. And classically, in American society, when we talk about that, we often end up talking about the condition of African Americans. So the connection is obvious and it's important, but please understand that I'm looking at it from a little bit broader perspective without really losing the main thrust of what we're supposed to be talking about. So with that in mind, let me kind of go through some of the preliminary stuff and talk about it a little bit. And what I'm mostly interested in doing today is to give you resources and give you ways of going out there and finding out more information on your own. In 60 minutes, there's no way I could cover this subject in a useful, productive way. So I'm going to try to give you some resources, and hopefully you can follow up on those on your own. I'd also like to put in a plug for one of the diversity speakers who is actually coming back to GRCC on March 26th. Dr. Robert Bullard was scheduled to speak in February, but we've had this problem with, weather this winter, and it's kind of closed things down often. So he's coming back to talk about environmental racism from a national perspective, and I really would encourage you to go to see him on the 26th at 7 o'clock over at Fountain Street Church, part of our diversity series. And many of his ideas are ideas that I certainly have borrowed from over the years. And I have taught from time to time the sustainability class here at GRCC, and I always do a unit in that class and that talks about him and about these ideas. So, social responsibility and environmental justice. The questions we have to ask, and I'm more interested in questions than I am in answers. In the academic environment, it's our job to question. It's our job to ask the questions, to pose the questions, to make things uncomfortable. So I always tell my students that my job is to make them uncomfortable, and I usually succeed. So that's part of what my hope to today is to raise some issues that may not be entirely comfortable to talk about. One of them is, how do we utilize the resources available to us today without jeopardizing the resources others will need in the future? Well, we say, well, first of all, we can barely get along today without worrying about the future. But the reality is that the reason we are where we are today is because somebody in the past worried about the future or took the future into consideration. There's an old Native American concept that you don't make any decisions now without thinking about what the impact will be 7 generations from now. We, I'm assuming most of you could identify parents, grandparents. How many of you know could tell you who your great-grandparents are? How about great-great-grandparents? Great-great-great-great-great-grandparents? Those are the people who are making decisions that have had an impact on how we live today. Some of those decisions were really bad, and we're living with those consequences. Some of them were very good, and they have helped us dramatically. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. How can we decide today about how we're going to live without taking into consideration what impact that's going to have on people down the road 7 generations? Think about do a little math and figure out how far into the future we need to be thinking. And that's a pretty serious consideration. Who will decide how we go about allocating resources? Well, the answer is simple. I will, and you'll go along with it, right? That's a good idea. I think it's a great idea, personally. Now, people are making decisions about allocating resources right now. People are deciding how to allocate oil, for example. That's why when you leave here and you check your cell phones, there'll be a message from Exxon asking you how they should allocate oil. Saudi Arabia will call you up to say, how much oil do you think you should have? You get the point? Lots of decisions about allocating resources are made outside of your environment, outside of your ability to influence the direction. And one of the things we talk about within the context of sustainability is why. Why should these decisions be made away from the people who are most impacted by those decisions? That's one of those tough questions, and it tends to make people very uncomfortable. If you get a chance to ask any politicians a question like that, it's always fun to watch the reaction. How do you integrate social responsibility with environmental needs and economic needs? Well, that's the subject matter for a semester's discussion. So I'm going to assume that by the time we're done here, we will have begun to address that at least to some degree. So let's talk about this thing called sustainability, this big word that people have trouble spelling, aren't really entirely comfortable with. My theory is I just keep using the word over and over again, and sooner or later people will stop whining about it and just adopt it. Sustainability means, one of the things it means is we want to use resources. Now here I've expanded a little bit. Human, economic, and environmental resources in a responsible way. So what does that mean in a responsible way? Well, it means that, from my perspective, it means that you have to take responsibility for using resources. Not them, not those people over there, not the other people that you like to blame when things don't go well, but you. So it's always fun to be included, right? So I'm including you in the decision-making process. Secondly, to leave sufficient resources for future generations. Well, how do we determine what that means? What are sufficient resources? Let's leave future generations some nice video of what it was like to have oil. Okay, so they can look back nostalgically and say, "Oh, that was fun." But for 100 years, we used fossil fuels. I just said 100 years. That's what we've sucked all the fossil fuel out of the earth. It will be more than 100 years before we're done, but it won't take that much longer. We're efficient. We can use up resources fairly quickly, and we've done a good job of it. Thirdly, to consider and apply the principle of cooperation. You may have heard of that. Cooperation. It doesn't seem to end up being the focus of attention a lot of times when people are trying to make these kinds of decisions, but to decide cooperatively between the three elements: natural resources, human resources, and economic resources. They don't always necessarily fit together. I mean, I'd like to use economic resources so that I could have a really big, fast car and live in a big house and not worry about energy consumption. And if that means that the rest of you have to be a little cold and take the bus, well, so be it. Life is hard. Get used to it. Well, no, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how can we find some sort of equitable solution to the problem, not so that everybody has exactly the same. We're not talking about some sort of utopian communist thing here. We're talking about a marketplace economy where decisions are made, but they're made cooperatively as much as they're made competitively. All that stuff you learned in economics classes about Adam Smith being the one who really had all the bright ideas, forget that stuff. Tell your economics professors they're all wet, Mr. Abid. No, think about Peter Kropotkin, a well-known anarchist. Anarchist, bombs, right? No, a well-known philosophical anarchist who said, no, if you look at nature is about cooperation. Species cooperate as much as they do compete. Oh, sure, occasionally they eat each other and stuff like that, but that's part of the natural process. Mostly it's cooperation so that the entire system works, not competition so that we destroy this species to the benefit of that species. That's mostly not the way it works. So how can we use our economic resources in an effective way that will benefit people, not just some people, not just a few people, but most people, if not all people, in a reasonably efficient way, worldwide. Not just here, but around the world. Natural resources. What's the single most important natural resource that is in the gravest danger right now today? Think about, this is African American History Month. Think about the origins of African Americans coming from Africa. What is the resource in Africa that is most scarce today? Water. Water is, forget about oil. Oil will come and go. It won't be too much longer, and you'll see all those cars beside the road rusting away, abandoned hulks, no longer important. I like visions of the future. I don't mean too negative about this, but it's water. I went to a conference sponsored by a well-known business guru who has started up an organization around sustainability, and at Ford Motor Company. You may have heard of them. They used to make cars. At this meeting, he brought in not just experts who pontificated for a while. One of the things he made them do is they had to get off the stage. No stages. The second thing they had to do is when they were done talking, they had to go and sit with the audience and interact. And the third thing he did was he highlighted the work being done by some of the most important scientists in the world today who are having more impact than any other scientists. 12-year-old kids. who had been given grant money in various countries around the world to come up with what? Ways of purifying water. Because that is the key issue. And it doesn't apply just to the so-called third world nations. It doesn't apply to just people of one background or another. Part of the reason why I don't emphasize race a lot is because I don't believe in it. I'm philosophically opposed to the concept of race, so I don't talk about it too much. It's a modern construct that doesn't really have a lot of meaning. So it applies to everybody. So natural resources, human resources. How are we going to utilize the people of the world? Which generation of our history, the history of the world, had the most slavery? The one you're living in. There's more slavery in the world today than there's ever been in the history of the world. Where is the one place where slavery doesn't exist? No, it's not the United States. Actually, I'm not sure there is a place where it doesn't exist. There's slavery in the United States. It's not overt slavery. It's not guys in plantations with sipping mint juleps. It happens in tenement buildings in New York City among immigrant populations where there's not the kind of policing that we would expect would happen. So what I'm trying to get at here, and I'm sorry to go on so long, is that all of these are crucial key issues that have to do with how we figure out how to survive in a world where there's lots of issues to deal with, lots of questions to ask. So let's focus on one of the key elements here, social responsibility. What is it? What does it mean to be socially responsible? We must take into account the well-being of the community and all the people in the community. That sounds pretty good, right? Sounds very optimistic, very kind of idealistic. First question is, what is a community? We're a community college. What does that mean? We struggle with even defining what we mean by community. Our community is Kent Intermediate School District, plus all the people who come here who aren't part of that. Community is a concept that is about working together and having a sense of belonging. Who are the people that you feel like you belong with? Now, you may say family, I've got friends, but what about the political entities? What about the economic entities of the world? Where do you feel like you belong? And what does that look like? And what are your responsibilities within that context? Who is we? Usually we means them, doesn't it? It means they. We say, we have to take responsibility for this, don't you? And then we say to the politicians, take care of that. Well, politicians? Who came up with that idea? How do you determine the well-being of all? Well, once again, I'll decide and I'll tell you. How's that? Not so good, huh? No. How do we determine the well-being of all, and how do we come to some agreement that the well-being of all can be something that we can all agree on? That we don't have to end up fighting to see who gets to decide what the well-being is? Okay. So, with these few modest statements offering no challenge whatsoever to our status quo, let's move on. There is a concept out there. It was put together by a Scandinavian doctor, a physician. A physician in Sweden said, we're in trouble. We need to do something to help to stabilize the world community. There are serious problems in the world that need to be dealt with, and I'm going to do something. What? A Swedish physician decided to do something. He came up with an idea called the natural step. Karl Hendrik Robert. Google that name if you want to know more about the natural step. I don't have time to talk about it today, but basically I wanted to take a quote from his natural step story to talk about social responsibility. Now, think about this statement. In a sustainable community, human needs are met and as much human benefit as possible is created from each thing taken from or released into nature. That's a long sentence and it's kind of hard, but if you pull it apart, first of all, he's talking about a sustainable community. So there's that key word, community. We have to have that sense of community. We have to have a sense of belonging to something that encompasses more than just our needs. Human needs are met and as much benefit as possible is created from each thing taken or released into nature. So, in other words, you have to decide. You have to say, we're not going to do this unless it meets these criteria. Oh boy. Now we got problems. Because we're going to have to be serious about this. We're going to have to take these decisions responsibly. Let's release pollution into nature. Excuse my language. What the hell? Somebody else can deal with it. Let's do it more. Let's do more of it. Well, I know. Let's do some more. Somehow it won't matter. I don't think so. Social tensions from inequities and other examples of disrespect for human values hamper our chances to transform the community. Again, pretty wordy, but social tensions from inequities. Are there inequities in the world? Are there inequities in the United States? Are there inequities in Grand Rapids? Are there inequities in your neighborhood? We'll get to that in a minute. I've got a website I'd like to take a look at. Disrespect for human values. Well, disrespect, I mean, now, come on. Disrespect, that's not so bad. But what happens when you are, to use a more recent word, disrespected? What happens? Well, unfortunately, we see the result of what happens when people get disrespected a lot of times in the news. You know about the news. That's the place where they report approaching storms and who got shot. So every day we read about what happens when people are disrespected in one way or another. These things hamper our chances to transform the community. Well, I think that's rather polite. I would be a little stronger and say they make it impossible for us to do it. Several years ago, the president of Grand Rapids Community College signed what's called the Talloires Declaration. That's French, and as we all know, the French created a language that was non-pronounceable so that they could avoid having anybody pronounce it, unlike other people. So, the Talloires Declaration basically pulled together primarily colleges and universities around basic ideas of sustainability and said, we need to do something. And this college committed itself to that principle. Developed by university leaders for a sustainable future. You can Google that and take a look if you're interested in that. It calls for establishing partnerships, cooperation, collaboration, community with other educational institutions to teach about principles and practices of sustainable development. One of the offshoots here in Grand Rapids of that was the creation of Community Sustainability Partners, which is a collaboration of the city, public schools, Grand Valley, Aquinas, and GRCC. Yes, we actually talk to each other and learn from each other in order to try to be better partners and collaborators. What do we see as our responsibility within this context of sustainability and specifically in social responsibility? Community goals include things like supporting clean and healthy neighborhoods. That's our responsibility as a community college to support clean and healthy neighborhoods. it's not only our responsibility to offer classes between the hours of 8 and 3 in the afternoon or whatever. It's our responsibility to be a community partner and to pay attention to where those inequities exist and do something about it. It is our responsibility as stewards of the community. Establish and maintain partnerships with community neighborhood associations. Identify resources that GRCC has to offer. Link our resources to community needs. Again, there are some examples of that kind of thing. If you're interested in the kinds of things we're doing, you can go out on the GRCC website and /sustainability or /green, and our web page will show up, and you can take a look at the CC web page. The sustainability plan for the college, and you can see some of the things that we're working on to try to accomplish these goals. Support local businesses that employ sustainability principles. We're part of Local First, which means we support not just local businesses, but local businesses that agree that it's necessary to have community goals and to work in partnership and collaboration with communities, and specifically with neighborhoods that have the kinds of needs that we're talking about. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Pretty much talked about it all already. This is a bad definition, but it happens to be kind of the official one. Pursuit of equal justice and equal protection under the law for all environmental statutes. If you want to have some real fun, read some environmental statutes, especially if you're having trouble sleeping. Unless you have a lawyer bent in you, you're going to find it's rather unpleasant. Without discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or economic status. So that's what environmental justice is all about. Paying attention to not just to hugging some trees. Nothing wrong with hugging a tree. They don't hug back very well. But that it doesn't do much good in the long run to just hug trees. You also have to think about the impact of what you're doing. Here's some questions. What are the key issues concerning environmental justice? We're going to talk about this. Questions to think about. What is the evidence that neighborhoods and or towns with significant minority populations have negative experiences in relationship to pollution? I'm going to give you an example of that. Who are the major players in the debate? Who are the people who are responsible for asking the questions and trying to come up with answers to these questions? And what do the statistics tell us about exposure to pollution? I'm just going to give you a taste of some of the sites that tell you answers to some of these questions. Let's take a look at this. This is a scorecard which comes from an organization called Community Center. You can go back to their front page and see what they're about. But let's just do something interesting here, and let's look at GRCC. Let's see. Can I type from this or not? You know, it doesn't seem to be responding. Maybe I'm not doing it right. Is there a control? Oh, maybe it's not. Connect. Oh, there it goes. I didn't have it on.
Oh, okay.
Technology is my friend. Nah, it's still not working. Rats.
This needs to be in there.
I just want to be able to type type 49505 in there. Oh, there we go. It's good to have somebody who knows what they're doing, doesn't it?
Get record?
Yeah. Thank you. So one of the things you often hear is, well, that's all just a bunch of talk, and there's nothing to support or substantiate any of this stuff that you're talking about. So let's take a look. This is a place you may have heard of. This is called Kent County. Some of you may have lived in that place or visited it from time to time. Here are some interesting statistics. Release of toxic chemicals. For people of color, the estimate is 190,000 chemical releases compared to whites, 140,000 chemical releases, or a ratio of 1.36. Now, what that means is that people of color are in places where they are more likely to be exposed to chemical releases by essentially 1/3 more than whites. Now, what that really means is that they live closer to places where pollution is common. Okay, I don't think I have to work real hard to convince you that that sort of thing happens. Just look at neighborhoods. Cancer risk from hazardous air pollutants. You can see the ratio. Superfund sites. Now this is interesting because we don't have a huge amount of Superfund sites in Kent County, but you'll notice that even here the ratio is not equal by any means. That people of color are about half again as likely to be exposed to Superfund sites. Do you know what a Superfund site is? It's a site that's been designated by the state, in some cases by the national government, as being so polluted that it has to be cleaned up, that we can't ignore it. We're absolutely going to clean it up, and we're going to get on it right away, as soon as we've got some money. You'll be pleased to know that the State of Michigan Superfund fund is now broke. So don't be expecting any trucks to show up tomorrow. Facilities emitting criteria air pollutants. Criteria air pollutants are the ones that are cited as having toxic capacities. Again, look at the ratio here. 2.5 times more likely, 1.5 times more likely to be exposed to facilities emitting criteria air pollutants than whites. Now, income is also interesting because income, of course, doesn't necessarily automatically indicate race, but as we know, it can certainly be a correlation that we can make. Low-income families, again, the lower the income, the more likely you are to be exposed to these particular problems. Again, calculations based on distribution of burdens by poverty. Once again, you can see the distributions. They don't change dramatically based on the different categories, but that I think is interesting. I think the next one is the most interesting one of all. Distribution of burdens by childhood poverty. We are a nation where we love children. We love to make sure that they get born, and we love to see them in commercials on TV, and we like to have them featured in Oscar-nominated movies and and all that kind of stuff. But if they're born to poor families and they live behind a pollution site, well, problems exist, and what can you do? These, again, suggest that kids below the poverty level, for example, the last statistic there, have a ratio of 2.42 in relationship to kids above poverty in terms of exposure to pollutants. I think this is, this just shows the distribution by burden. So I don't think that's really worth looking at. There was a map. I'm not going to. Let's just take a look at this one and see if that is the one that I'm looking for. Oh, locator. There we go. No, those are just studies. Okay. Well, let's not spend any more time on that. It gives you a sense of the fact that not only do we have a sense that there are problems, but we also have statistical evidence that proves that there are risks that are faced by people in some categories as opposed to people in other categories. I just thought one other site that I'll actually take you to just to give you an illustration. One of the more recent organizations to emerge is something called the Environmental Justice Partnership, which just really got going in the last couple of years. And if you go to this site, what you find is that they've begun to try to develop, and this is basically East Baltimore, but I thought as an indicator of local action, this is a good example of the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. It talks a little bit about the partnership. I thought it might be interesting to see that there are outcomes. It's not just about talking about the problems, but trying to solve the problems. They talk about some seminars that they've had. They also talk about some of the children related activities. I thought this is particularly interesting. The development of a toxic tour. I think that might be an interesting thing for us to do as a community, is to have toxic tours, to actually locate, to know where some of the problems are that exist in the community. This is Baltimore, certainly, but I think we could probably do the same thing. If you're interested, quick jot these down. What I'll do is if you're here for a class and you want to reference any of these sites, I can get it to your professor, or I can post it out on our sustainability website as well. Surprisingly enough, even though we sometimes tend to be pretty critical of governments and what they're doing, if you go to the Environmental Protection Agency, if you check the EPA site out, they have a lot of good information, and they do highlight some of the progress that they've been making even in recent years. Department of Transportation, Green Action. And then there are obviously written sources. Robert Bullard, as I mentioned before, Unequal Protection is a good book if you're interested in following up on the subject. There are numerous articles. I just picked one that I've used in class before to put up here today. Again, this is not you're not here to put together a bibliography, I imagine, but it just goes to show you. You've got Bullard, you've got the social science area. They're interested in this in terms of policy decisions, governmental and political decisions. This is what it's all about. This is what sustainability is about. This is what social responsibility is about in relationship to sustainability. These are the kinds of issues that we're facing, the kinds of questions that we're asking. I'm not a big fan of trying to overwhelm you with data and give you as much information as possible so that you feel like you're full, but after a while you can't figure out what you ate, kind of thing. So what I thought I would do at this point is to stop talking for a couple of minutes and give you a chance to ask any questions or make any comments that you might want to make. So anyone have a question or a comment about what I've been talking about here?
If you have a question, just raise your hand, and Professor Light's on that side of the room. I'm over here. We'd like you to use the microphone because we're filming this and hope to get it out on our website, but also to be shown on GRCC TV. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll get the microphone to you. Yes, sir.
You mentioned how you feel like they're all related, all the economic, human equity, and environment. If that's the case, how do you feel about our economic system today and the environmental trouble we're in, as well as the human equity, things that we're in, just looking at now and how that's affecting?
Well, the easy answer is the sky is falling. The sky is falling. That's an easy answer. My response would be, I'm optimistic, And the reason I'm optimistic is not at the big level, so to speak, but rather at the local level. It seems to me there's an awful lot going on. Not only just environmental groups and individual concerns and community organizations, things like that, but I think that what you're finding is that within for lack of a better term, we'll call it a corporate community, there is a much greater awakening to how much sense it makes to begin to take these things into consideration. There is a concept that is used by a number of businessmen now and businesswomen called a natural capital, which takes into consideration what the values and costs are when you use resources, and what the implications are and how you can change the way you do things in order to reduce the impact that you have. Many of you may not know it, but West Michigan is probably one of the most important places for sustainability, especially sustainable business of anywhere in the country. Part of the reason for that is that there are a number of companies that have gotten the message long before this and have begun to start to work on these issues. I'll just cite two examples for you. One of them is Cascade Engineering. Familiar with Cascade Engineering? The Cascade Engineering has done more towards creating a more equitable workforce, a more socially diverse workforce than I think any business in the area. At the same time that they are seriously engaged in issues of environmental sustainability. They just got a big contract to help engineer wind turbine technology for a company in Sweden. Think about one of our big manufacturing giants of the past and maybe still today, office furniture. Both Herman Miller and Steelcase have been on a cutting edge in terms of paying attention to these issues. For example, Steelcase has and Herman Miller have been using more and more fabric that is biodegradable. There's a business guru by the name of Bill McDonough, who's been here several times in Grand Rapids, who lauds these companies for thinking about the future and how to go about doing things differently. And think about Steelcase. It's named after steel. Furniture is steel, but they use less and less steel. They're using more and more carbon fiber and things like that. So I'm sorry I got carried away, but those are just some examples. I think I'm more encouraged at the local level than I am at the national level sometimes. All the carpet used at GRCC at this point, all new carpet installed, is all recycled and recyclable carpet. It's an example. Other questions?
I'm going to take the liberty of having the microphone, and I'm going to ask a question. I am amazed at the grassroots local attention that is placed upon the sustainability movement, or that's come out of the sustainability movement. And I try to tell my students all the time that the greatest changes in human history come from the collective action of people working together when they recognize a cause that should be amended or fought for. And we're talking about the American Revolution in my class and how that started in the streets and built up. I'm curious if you were to give advice to any of us here about where we could go locally. Is there like one step you'd tell us? What's the first step we should take if we want to get involved in this or learn more about it? Is there one place you could recommend that we should go? Or
no, not one place, but there are lots of things you can do. And what I would recommend is that you do what is most comfortable to you first. Let your discomfort level rise as you become more comfortable with what you're doing. So if nothing else, those containers around campus that have the words recycle on them? Put your plastic in the plastic recycle container instead of in the classroom wastebasket. there's a low threat level action. We're going to have more containers on campus, incidentally. We don't have enough now. We're going to have more. Recycling isn't the answer to anything, but recycling is a stopgap. I would recommend that you pay attention to what's going on around you. Take a look at the community and what the community is doing. The fact that the city of Grand Rapids has been designated as a United Nations essentially demonstration city. I think the only one or one of two in the United States around sustainability. Look at what's happening right here. Take a look at what the West Michigan Environmental Action Council is doing, because they are much more in the sustainability mode, much less in the specifics of environment the way they used to be. You spend your money at stores that have the sign in the door, local first. That means that those places are making every effort that they can to buy local foods and local products before they go somewhere else. And the reason that's important is because it means you use less energy for transportation. It means you're utilizing local resources more efficiently. Go to the farmer's market in the summer. If any of you will cook, actually buy real food that actually came from a real farm that you could actually find if you looked, and give it a try. Besides, it's a great place because you get to rub elbows with real people, and
And it's probably healthier on top of it. So
wash all your food anyway.
That's right. Are there any other questions?
A friend of mine is a city planner for Clinton County, which I don't know, it's near Lansing. But anyway, a random member of her community came to her with a proposal to construct a windmill which would provide electricity for an entire cul-de-sac in his neighborhood. And I just thought that was kind of neat, and I wonder if you're familiar with any local planners or if you have any suggestions with what we could bring to our planners locally.
Well, my immediate response is tell local government folks that their regulations are stupid and they should stop using them. I'm sorry, that shouldn't say that. But the reality is that a lot of the things that prevent that from happening are government regulations that have been in place for a long time that no longer really apply very effectively. What I think is going to happen is that you may see some of that kind of local wind power generation at first, but I think that what's going to happen is you're going to see more and more wind power being generated on what are called wind farms in areas where the wind generation is most effective. For example, I don't know if you've read that they're beginning to construct a wind farm on the thumb of Michigan over near Bay City in that area. Those places are going to generate what's called green power or alternative energy, which then will be able to replace the coal-powered facilities that are the dominant facilities now. They're the ones that are pumping out all that CO2 into the air. But on the other hand, it's ideas like that and the implementation of ideas like that at the local level that frequently drive the next level, that frequently push the next level of county or township or even state government to move ahead. Email a governor and tell her the idea of having another nuclear plant is not the best solution, even though it's, you can make an argument for it. So there are other ways to do that. I probably didn't answer your question, but everything that happens locally is good. Other questions?
You mentioned the human and economic and environmental, and what's interesting to me about those three things is that two of them can fall under environmental, if depending on how you look at it. Like humans are part of the environment, as well as our economic ideas, which came from us, are therefore part of the environment. Some of the things I've read lately have talked about how we look at ourselves above nature. Do you think there's any merit to, beginning to shift that to realizing we're part of nature?
Well, there's an interesting book, and the author's name is going to escape me at the moment. She has done a lot of work around that subject. The book title is Biomimicry. And one of the things that's interesting is that the more people look at these issues and try to apply them to real-world problems, the more they begin to realize that nature has found solutions to some of these problems long ago, and we decided that our manufactured solutions were going to be better than those. And now we step back from them and look at them and say, maybe not so. Maybe not so much. So even things like basic engineering principles. Can we learn more from nature in terms of how we engineer things, as opposed to simply trying to manufacture them out of our own perspective? So, remember, I know that the topic that focus is on African American history, and my focus, to a large degree, was on social justice and where it fits into that picture. But remember that during African American History Month, we should remember that African Americans are part of the community. That they not being one of them, I say they, not because I want to separate them, but that they too should be at the table helping to make decisions that will affect them. And given the statistics that I showed you, their voice may have a lot more impact because they may be more likely to be impacted by some of the issues that we're talking about than someone like me who grew up in a white middle-class suburb and had no idea what a dump site was, except when we had old stuff to take to the dump. So I had to learn this stuff. Other people, unfortunately, grew up with it.
You said that, for example, there was more pollution in neighborhoods that had minorities in it than in other neighborhoods. What can some of those people in those neighborhoods do to stop this and let the city see that they're just as important as the other ones?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a complicated question because part of the problem is that the reason that factories that pollute are located in lower class neighborhoods is because the land is cheaper, and because often because they're there because they've been there a long time and they're close to the center city. And what happens in our society is that when people earn enough money, they move out of the city. And so people who can't afford to do that stay in the city, and they're the ones that get affected by all this sort of thing. One of the things that can happen at the neighborhood level is that neighbors of whatever ethnic background can pay attention to what's going on around them and what the implications are, beyond whether or not it's going to mean more jobs and whether or not it's going to mean better transportation or those kinds of things, but also what are the long-term impacts to doing whatever people want to do in this neighborhood on us. When GRCC built our MTech Center over here off of Granville, one of the things we did was to build it on what's called a brownfield. It's a place where probably consumers' energy was at one time, and they burned coal there. And the ground was saturated with coal tar and all kinds of chemicals and stuff. Well, that stuff had been sitting there uncontrolled, unregulated, and right behind it is a great big neighborhood and an elementary school. So when we went in, we had, in order to be able to build that building, and we did it deliberately, was to get the people who did the polluting first to pay for capping that stuff in such a way that it will no longer affect the neighborhood in a negative way. So some of these things are not intuitive. They're the kinds of things that take a little bit of work. But remember, even if it seems like a lot of work for me now, I've got kids. I've got grandkids. I have 10 grandkids. And I really don't want them to have to put up with the kind of stuff that we see. I'd love to think that they would have a better chance to live a clean and healthy life in cooperation with people of a wide variety of backgrounds.
Anybody else with a question? If not,
maybe a comment.
Okay.
Gary, a minute ago you talked about the inclusion and the importance of the inclusion of all people in a community and the decisions about a community. And so it also strikes me that one of the important links is around participatory democracy, and that one of the ways that we can all help with this is that we do need to be active in our political processes, and maybe even most particularly our local political processes, because it is all of those voices that make decisions that are more based on what human beings need. And so just a thought on what we can do, that sometimes we don't see that link between all of the points that you made and the importance of being active participants in our communities.
Well, when the founding fathers were busily working together to try to prevent participatory democracy by creating the Constitution, I'm not going to get any kind of rise out of him at all. Anyway.
Agreed.
The reality is that the largest percentage of people who vote are going to vote in the presidential election. And you will see the president after that on TV. They'll be doing stuff, and they'll tell you about it. And your influence on that president is going to be very, very minimal. You're going to have to work real hard to get his or her attention. On the other hand, the lowest percentage of voters is always found at the local level. And my theory is the reason that people don't vote at the local level is because it's so important. It's where the real hard work is. It's where you have to deal with things like zoning laws. And it's one thing to talk about charisma and that kind of stuff, which is more fun. But often it's the zoning laws that matter.